This is DMXRE with a continuing example of how to switch from statutory accounting to U.S. GAAP accounting for a 10-year term life insurance product. We've already completed the conversion. There's two steps left here. One is because these calculations are being completed, there's going to be a byproduct that can come out of the calculations, and that byproduct is a source of earnings analysis. The last step would be going over a set of controls to make sure everything's working properly. So in this one, we're looking at source of earnings, and what the source of earnings will do is it will restate the income statement without using a change in reserve item. And there's a real important reason for doing this, and that is hardly anybody understands what is a change in reserves. You ask an accountant, they'll tell you, oh, that's an actuarial thing. Well, there's a lot more to it than that, and you don't have to write down change in reserves on your income statement. You can rearrange things from the reserve roll forward to get it all into a meaningful type of fashion. That's what's been done here. Now we're going to start off and do this for statutory. With statutory, you can see all these items here: margin and premiums, mortality, lapse, selling costs, taxes. There is no change in reserves for this part, just the total profits. Now, when we take a second, we look at the total profits here, for instance, 1.115 thousand, or you can say 1.115 million. That is the same as what we're achieving on the statutory sheet for the income statement right there. So you don't get a change in the amount of profits, it's just rearranging it into a more meaningful fashion. That's what's going on with the source of earnings. Now, there's a number of components here. Margin and premiums. What we're doing here is we're going in and looking at the premiums, and then we're subtracting out the net premiums from the reserve roll forward calculation. So if I go back to the statutory sheet, our normal income statement, you have premiums, but part of the change in reserves down here, if I roll all the way down to the bottom, is going to be net premiums. And so if we go back here onto the source of earnings sheet, if you take the full amount of premiums that we actually were paid, and then you subtract off the amount of premiums that are included in the reserve roll forward, we get 335. That's the margin in the premiums. You can do similar things with mortality. What's going on with mortality here is this is the amount of margin in your reserve calculation. We'll take the amount of mortality that's coming through the financial statements, the amount of mortality or deaths that's coming through on the reserve roll forward, we get 73,000. So that's the amount of margin that was built into the assumptions for the reserve roll forward. Lapse is not explicitly stated on the former income statement, but when we do the reserve roll forward, there is an adjustment for lapses on the statutory sheet, and that adjustment for lapses goes into the source of earnings. So this is where if people lapse less than expected, there's going to be a little bit if they lapse more than expected, there's going to be a gain each and every period. Ongoing expenses is showing up as zero, and the reason it's showing up as zero is when we did our reserve calculation, we assumed best estimate expenses. We didn't put a margin in there. If you don't put a margin in there, then you shouldn't expect anything to come through here on a source of earnings analysis. Investment income on reserves. The reserves are going to grow with interest, albeit at a conservative rate. Then you're going to earn something a little bit more than that, and so you get a little bit of a gain due to investment income on the assets backing reserves. We can go back over here. We got investment income on other assets. There is nothing on a reserve roll for that. It just comes through. Selling costs and taxes, we get our profits. So some people find this a much more meaningful way to look at the financial statements. The big item is going to be the margin and the premiums. This is going to be the amount released because we have conservative assumptions each and every period. There is no reserve change in reserves on this particular type of display for our income statement. Now we can do the same thing on a GAAP. What you'll notice here on the GAAP stuff is, one, there's a lot more zeros in here on expectations, just because we're using best estimate assumptions on mortality and lapse and expenses and other items, even on investment income in this case. If numbers were to show up in this on actual practice, it would tell us that our assumption making process is not working as good as we want, because in most cases for US GAAP, we want best estimate assumptions. Most of the profit comes through on the margin and premiums. We determine a net premium, which is just enough to pay for off all the benefits and expenses at issue, and we can see how much profit or how much margins in each one of the premiums as they're paid. Once again, it's a useful type of way of looking at it here. Selling costs. If we go back up to the US GAAP side, we had selling costs. We lost 1.8 million in year one. The selling costs here are spread out uniformly over the life of the product. You can see them all here. I'm going to highlight them, and then hopefully you're using full screen. You can come down here. You can see the sum of those items. Whoops. The sum of those items is 1.8 million if you look at the bottom of your screen. We also will see taxes coming through. The taxes are going to be a little bit different here on a US GAAP basis. The profits, as they come through, 148,000, 206,000, and so forth. We go back to the US GAAP sheet. The profits here, 148, 206, they match up. So source of earnings analysis is a very useful way. It gets rid of stuff that people don't understand when they're looking at financial statements. Thank you for watching.